If you have your Bibles, I invite you to go with me to the book of Hebrews, chapter 11 and 12, that we're going to be looking at over the next few weeks. The talk about faith. Faith is not a really complicated thing to understand. Sometimes doing it is a different challenge. Don't know if this story is true or not. Heard a story about a young guy who was a mountain climber, and there was this mountain, actually it was more like a cliff, that he just was dying to get to and climb. And so finally the day came, and he was going to attack this. So he's all prepared, he has all his ropes and whatever it is they hook into the side of the cliff, and he's all ready, and up he goes. And he gets about 20 feet from being at the top, and all of a sudden, not only does his foot slip, but his equipment gives way, and he is falling to what will certainly be his death. Some bizarre thing happens. He hits his shoulder on something protruding, and it turns his body, and his shoulder catches on this branch that's just like sticking out from the side of this cliff. And he's able to grab on with his hands. So there he is, hanging. He is about 50 feet from the top and a long, long way from the bottom. What to do? Thinks for a minute. And then he looks up and he yells, "Is anybody up there?" Silence. So he yells louder, "Is anybody up there?" And then he hears a voice. He says, "Friend, this is God. I just need you to let go. I got you." "Is there anybody else up there?" Faith. Faith is simply believing not only that God is good, but everything that he says is right. This book is about faith. Early 2000s, Ellen and I at that time were living in West Africa in the country of Cote dIvoire for about 4 years. It went from a coup d'etat to a civil war, and they were just kind of tumultuous years. So you never knew from one day to the next what life was going to be like. The school that my children were attending, the International School of Abidjan, through those days, every time something bad would happen, the school would shrink. Most of the students there were children of international business people or diplomats, and so when it gets scary in countries like that, they start leaving. So it went from 500 to 400 to 300. 2003, January, boom, it blows up, and a whole bunch more leave the country. We got chased out for a couple weeks, ran to the next country to wait and see if it would calm down, and it did. So we came back. When we came back, there's only about 100 kids left in the school. My wife was on the school board, so trying to figure out how to do life in this craziness. The next 2 years, it got better. So the school's growing again. We're thinking, okay, it's calm, it's all good. We're in for the long haul. December 2004, literally in one weekend, the lid blew off. People are rioting in the streets. A lot of the families that were families from the school, their homes were ransacked, burned, everybody fled. The last day, the decision was made that the school was going to close. The group I was working with, we decided we needed to leave the country to get our families out. So I drove up some back roads, got to the school, and went to see the director, who had become a friend of ours. When you live through war with people, you become really good friends. So I went to see him just to say goodbye, not knowing if we'd ever talk to him again or see him again, and we were just telling stories. And then I got up to leave, and I said to him, "It's really hard to say goodbye to you," but I said, I hope we'll see you again, and somehow God's going to take care of all this." And he looked at me and he said, "You have something that I don't have." And I'm thinking, what is he talking about? I know it's not money. That's not what he's talking about. And he looked at me and he said, the thing that you have is faith. I thought, well, yeah, I mean, I know that's important, but no, it's huge. It changes everything. Two thoughts came to me as over the ensuing weeks I thought about his comment. The first is this: it's not really faith, it's God. God is the one who can change anything. But the way that you connect to him is through faith. So it's not that, oh, wow, that person has an amazing faith. No, that person has God and has found a way by faith to connect to God, and that changes everything. The second thing is that when he said that to me, I thought, well, dear friend, you can have faith too. It's not complicated. You just got to believe. But sometimes we treat faith as this thing that sometime in your life at one point you prayed this prayer of faith and you grabbed onto God. No, that's important. But faith takes a lifetime. It takes a lifetime to believe. It's a journey. This book of Hebrews was written to a group of Christians that lived in the second half of the first century. They were mostly Jews. They had come to faith in Jesus Christ. They believed in the Messiah. Many of them had sacrificed greatly to follow him. And in the first years, it was good. But now they had run into some really difficult times. In fact, some had been killed. They were being persecuted. Their faith was being shaken. Is this worth holding on to? So a lot of them were being tempted to say, you know what? I'm not going to abandon my faith, but I'm just going to kind of be more quiet about it and not be. And the writer to the Hebrews is saying, don't do that. Don't do that. Hold on to your faith. It's the most precious thing that you have. Faith connects us to God. It's a noun. It's not a verb, it's a noun. But even though it's a noun, it's not tangible. You can't touch it. I can't, like this morning, say, here's faith, let me show it to you. You can't see it with your eyes. But that doesn't mean it's not real. It just means that you can't see it with your eyes. And the writer to the Hebrews is saying, don't lose your faith. Grow deeper in your faith. In the beginning of this story in the scriptures, the thing that separated men from God was this whole thing of trust. What happened in the garden was not about the law, it was about trust. So Satan comes as a serpent to Eve and says to Eve, Did God say this to you? Really? He said that? What's he saying? He's saying, you can't really trust God. He said that to you because he's trying to keep you from knowing good, and he's trying to keep you from something. And the tragedy of the garden was not just the action. The tragedy was that they didn't trust God. Trust was broken. And from that day till today, God has been working on a plan of redemption to bring us back to trust. What does he want from you? All he wants is for you to trust him. In fact, in this letter, he says in verse 6, chapter 11, verse 6, that without faith, it's impossible to please God. So you can do whatever you want, but if you don't trust him, you can't please him. What he wants is for you to believe and trust. Most of the faith challenges that you and I face are not intellectual. We come up with all this stuff, but most of the trouble we have with faith is not intellectual. It's emotional. It's something that happened. We were deeply hurt by something, and it's just hard to trust. and he's calling us back. So Hebrews 11 starts like this. First, he begins by describing what faith is. Verse 1, he says, faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. So what is it? Well, the things that God reveals about himself and the things that he promises us, he calls them substance. They're real, but you can't see them. So the only way that you can have them is by believing. There's a new movement in our culture called New Atheist. There's a real new push towards atheism. And one of the things that they say about people of faith, like me and like us, is that faith in a God is irrational. Like the only way you could believe that is just to throw out your reason and No. The stuff that we believe about God is based in a story that's been going on for thousands of years. He's revealed himself. So when you believe, you're not just believing like, well, yeah, I hope this happens. No, you're believing in a God that's revealed himself and for generations has been faithful to his people. The promises he makes to us, we don't have them all yet. But we believe him because of who he is. And he asks us to trust him. So chapter 11, he starts out, this is what faith is, and without it, it's impossible to please God. And then he tells a bunch of stories about people of faith. If you read through the Hall of Fame of Faith, there's some names you'll recognize, like Abraham, the big hitters. But there's a bunch of people in there who you wouldn't maybe think should be in there. People like Rahab. People like Gideon. Gideon was a wimp. When God came to find him, he couldn't even find him. He was hiding. And he calls him out. And the writer of the Hebrews is saying, look at these people. Why should you look at them? Not because they were these unbelievable people, but because when God spoke to them, they believed it and they followed. So, what I'd like to look at today is this. It says that faith is about believing things that you can't see. So to have faith, there's things that you can't see. But the fact that you can't see doesn't mean you're blind. It just means that the things you're looking at are not perceptible yet. But you're not blind. You've seen who he is. You've seen what he's done. And he's asking you to trust that he will continue to be who he said he is. So how is he calling us to faith? Faith it's something that it either grows or it dies. It doesn't ever just sit there. And so what he's asking of these people, don't stop. Let your faith grow. Cultivate it. How do you cultivate faith? It doesn't happen by accident. You're not going to all of a sudden become this unbelievable person of faith by accident. So how do you cultivate it? Well, let's jump. One of the examples he uses is Abraham. What did Abraham do? He just believed God. God said to him, you live here, I want you to move over there. So he packed up everything and he moved. We're not talking about moving from Cleveland to Pittsburgh. We're talking about like a whole nother country, away from his family. But he did it. In fact, every time that God spoke to him, sometimes he tripped up a little bit, but he just did what he heard God say. So faith is not about sitting under a tree trying to conjure up enough emotion if I can just believe this. No. It's simply when God says, forgive, you forgive. When Jesus says this, you do this. Sometimes the perception that we have of faith is that to be a person of faith, you have to get to this place where you just don't doubt anything. Yeah, good luck with that. It's not going to happen. That's not what faith is. Doubt is not the absence of faith. Faith is simply looking at something and saying, I understand it, I don't understand it, but it doesn't really matter. This is what God said, and that's what I'm going to do. So how does that grow? Well, let me read his exhortation after chapter 11. Now he's encouraging these believers, okay, let's do it. Let's grow this faith. This is what he says, chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore. Now when you see that word, there's a good question to ask yourself. What's it there for? Well, it's there for you to remember what he just said. He was just talking about what faith is and what it looks like. And he says, if all of these people lived by faith and did this, therefore, you also, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles us, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer, the author and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. So how do you grow your faith? Well, he says this is how you do it. This is the image. He says, since you are surrounded by this unbelievable cloud of witnesses. What is that? Well, he's not talking about the Microsoft cloud. That didn't actually even exist back then. I don't even know if it exists now. I've never seen it, but I've heard that it's out there. Who is this cloud? Well, the cloud is this group of people from every generation that have believed God. He says, you're surrounded by them. Listen to what they're saying. Listen to their testimony. This is the image I have. This is not what he's saying, but it gives me an image of what this looks like. You're surrounded by this group of men and women who have gone before, who are cheering and saying to you, believe it, it's true. A number of years ago, we were living for a short time in Wheaton, Illinois, and the school that our daughter Nadia was attending had this thing called Girls on the Run. So she joined it. The bad thing about Girls on the Run is that they have to have a parent join them on the run. So I got nominated, and so I was part of Girls on the Run. And they would do this thing every week and run around, and then the final of it was this 5K run in Chicago, and you go with your kid and you run this thing. What happened at the end of November, early December, I don't remember exactly the date, in Chicago, and that was a year when El Nino was nowhere to be found. It was like below zero, freezing. I mean, you shouldn't even be outside in this stuff. And there we are, we're going to run a 5K. I was sure nobody else would show up. But we get there, and there's literally thousands of people at this thing. So you're just this massive people. The gun goes off, and you start running your 5K. So you get 1K, 2K. By 3K, you're finally not totally frozen. You're actually feeling a little warm. And then we got to 4K, and I'm starting to get tired. When you're running with a bunch of people, you don't want to look dumb. So you're trying to keep up with everybody, and then you get 4, you go, I can't keep up at this pace. This isn't going to work. So we found a place to drink some water. And we just got to get to the end. Well, you come along the last turn, and then it goes into the stadium there where the Chicago Fire play. And when you run into the stadium, there's all these people. And you're up on the screen, and my wife's out there in the crowd, and everybody's screaming, you can do this! And all of a sudden, I'm running. Unbelievable. That's what he's saying. You are surrounded by generations of people who have sacrificed, who have believed this stuff, and if you will listen to what they're saying, they are saying, yeah, it's worth way more than this. Just wait and see. Keep the faith. It's true. So, what I'd like to look at this morning is 3 ideas. Faith can't see, but it's not blind. So, what do you look at? This sounds a lot better in French. In French, you say, il y a les 3 regards de la foi. Amen. Doesn't that sound good? What that means is that there's 3 ways that faith should look. The first thing that he says we should look at is that we should look behind us. We should look back and worship. How do you cultivate faith? You look behind you. All these people that have gone before us, look at their story. If you read the book of Psalms, there's a lot of laments in there. There are times in David's life and Asaph's life and others' lives that were really difficult, times when their faith was being really tested, and they would cry out to God, but they would end the prayer with words like this. I think Psalm 77, it says, "But to this I will appeal." And then they start telling stories about what happened in Egypt, what happened in the wilderness, all the things that God did. Well, if he did all of that, then on this one, I'm going to trust him. So he's saying, remember, look back. That's what we do on Sunday morning when we gather here. That's what worship is. It's remembering. Think if you didn't do this for 2 years, I'm not going to church anymore. I'm not saying to do that. I'm just saying if that happened, your faith would start to dwindle because you would forget. We're all like that. So to remember, he's saying, stop, say it out loud, worship. So what are the stories? Well, he tells the story of Gideon. He tells the story of the Red Sea. When God delivered his people out of Egypt, he was delivering them and then taking them to the promised land. But in between here and here, there's 40 years. I mean, after the Red Sea, what else did they need? Really? They not only got to leave Egypt, but by the time they left, the Pharaoh's like, get out. Here, gold, diamonds, take it, get out of here. And they leave. And they get to the Red Sea, and now what? So God literally opens the Red Sea in front of them, and they walk across. So after that, like, what else do they need? Seriously. Like, if you've seen that, you should be good for about 25 years. But you're not, because you've seen it too, and you're not. Because faith is not about a month from now, or 10 months from now, or 2 years from now. It's about today and tomorrow. It's about believing God right now. And the stuff that's in the past, if you don't look back, you're going to forget it. So when they finally got across the Jordan River, Joshua says to them, on your way through, I want each of you as tribes to pick up a rock and bring it with you. And when they got to the other side, they set up this mountain of rocks. In fact, if you walk through the wilderness where the Israelites wandered, you'll find these piles of rocks everywhere. Why are they there? So that 40 years later, 80 years later, when they're walking by and somebody's son says, hey, Dad, why are these rocks here? Well, let me tell you what God did. So how do you cultivate faith? You look back. It's weird because if you look at the story of Israel, the whole point of those 40 years, you could resume in one sentence. It was so that they would learn to trust God. Because if they didn't trust him, none of the things that he had for them were ever going to work. But you don't learn to trust God in big things in one day. It takes a lifetime of over and over and over again trusting. This thing that we are doing in Olmsted Falls, this Hope Community Church, it's a faith venture. If you would have told me a year ago, January 3rd, that I would be standing here this morning talking to you about Hebrews, I would have said, probably not. that's not going to happen. But here we are. How did we get here? How has God done what he's done to this point? Well, it's literally just been one step at a time. I'm not a person that is given to a lot of worry. Like once I go to sleep at night, I'm in till morning. But the last year in my life, there's been a lot of nights like at 4 a.m. when I just wake up. And then I can't go back to sleep. I can't go back to sleep because I'm thinking about, this is ridiculous. You got to be kidding me. How is that going to work? What about... Faith is simply believing enough to take the next step that's in front of you. So if you're asking me, Pastor, what's Hope Community Church going to look like a year from now? I don't have all those answers. But I do know the one who called us, what he wants more than anything is for us to trust him. It's not about this building. It's about a group of people believing together that what he's called us to this place to do, he will do it if we just trust him. But he's not going to give us a 10-year plan. He just gives us the next step, and we follow. I could literally stand here for 4 or 5 hours this morning and tell you stories of the last year, of ways that God has just shown up. He's shown up with people. At times when you think, how is that going to happen? I was standing right back in the back of this room one night after a dinner, and Marcia was standing there, and she said, you know what, do you need somebody to do bulletins? I said, yeah, I can't think of anything I don't need somebody for. Like, that would be great. So she signed up to do bulletins. She had no idea what she was signing up for. But God has put her right in the place where he had that we needed for all of this to happen. And I'm not picking on Marcia. It's happened over and over again, and it will continue to happen over and over again, not because of us, but because of him. Second idea, faith looks around and it widens. The way you widen your faith is he said this cloud of witnesses. It's not just all these people that are like gone to heaven. There are people in this generation who are walking this faith. So he says, look around you and follow them. See them and be inspired in your faith. Who are they? A few months ago, having devotions one night, and I asked my family, who are the people in your life that have most inspired your faith, that you look at and say, that's the person I want my faith to look like? And so they said, well, this person, and they mentioned 6 people. Of the 6 people, 4 of them were women. One of them was a teacher, one was a housewife, one was a nurse. Why do I say all that? People of faith are not like Nobel Peace Prize winners always. They're just normal people, like Gideon and Rahab and Tom and Fred and Joe, who just have enough courage to believe God and do it. I was talking to somebody after the first service, and he was saying to me, I just had a really tough place in my life. That sermon really touched me. And I said, well, what if what God's doing is not about the success of this or the success of that? He just wants you to live out faith, and as you do it, your faith is going to inspire somebody else's faith. That's what he wants. So he says, look around. So my encouragement to you is to hang out with people that inspire your faith. Find people, take them out to coffee. Like, when you see somebody, there's people in this room whose faith has inspired me. Find those people. Be one of those people for his sake. Last idea. The third regard, the third look of faith, he says this: fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and finisher of your faith. Where did this faith come from? Well, in our generation, we like faith. In fact, in our culture, we talk a lot about faith. If you listen to Disney, they talk about faith. And all you got to do is just believe. Baloney. Faith is worthless if what you believe in has no value. So faith is really powerful if what it does is connect you to the living God. So he says, fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and finisher of your faith. So how do you grow faith? You just keep looking at Jesus. How do you do that? When I was in seminary, one of my history of Christianity professor, every semester when you would take his class, the first day, all he would talk about is, if you're going to make it in ministry, the most important thing is to be with Jesus. So learn to do it. He said, every day, spend time with him. Every day, read the Gospels. Read the Gospels every day. You can read everything else too, but every day read the Gospels so that you're just soaking in the life of Jesus. Let his life just begin to soak into your being. 25 years after I graduated, I was speaking at a church in Georgia, and I look out, and there's this guy. He's retired. He's old now. After this church, I grabbed him. I said, Dr. Farrell, are you still reading the Gospels? He said, absolutely. I never miss a day. I can't breathe without it. Fix your eyes on Jesus. It's what changes us. It makes you start to believe things that he believed, so that when he says, forgive, you forgive. When he says, bless your enemies, you bless your enemies. You start to look like him. Fix your eyes on Jesus. That is not our natural tendency. I said to you a few minutes ago, there have been a number of nights where I woke up. When you wake up at 4 in the morning, usually what you see is obstacles. You want to know what the obstacles are to this church plant? I'll tell you. No, I'm not going to. But there's a lot of them. I mean, he says, don't fix your eyes on those things. Fix your eyes on Jesus. Peter's walking on water, literally. He's literally stepping and walking across a lake in the middle of a storm. And his eyes are fixed on Jesus. And then all of a sudden, he thinks to himself, self, what am I standing on? And he looks down and he starts to sink. Faith grows when you fix your eyes on Jesus. Fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and finisher of your faith. Let me close with this story. A few years ago, I heard an interview with Tim Allen. I think he was Santa Claus or something. He's an actor. That's not the important thing. The important thing was this conversation he was having with a guy who was interviewing him, and he was talking about his father. And when he was 11 years old, his father was killed tragically in a car accident. He was on his way home from a football game and was hit by a drunk driver and was killed instantly. So he's talking about that event, and he said, it literally in my life changed everything forever. This is what caught my attention. At the end of the interview, at the end of the conversation, Tim Allen says this: part of me, because of what happened, still does not trust God. He said, I knew that my father was dead, but I was never satisfied that there was an answer. And I wanted an answer from God. Explain this to me. And he closes the interview with these words. He said, I have had a tumultuous relationship with my Creator ever since. This is 50 years later. Let me read to you the words from another man. His name is Richard Williams. You've probably never heard of his name. He was a medical missionary in South America. This is a number of years ago. He got sick. He was on a boat trying to get back to his home. He's laying in the bottom of the boat, dying of scurvy and starvation, and this is what he writes to his family. He writes this: should anything prevent me from finishing this letter, I want you, my loved ones at home, to know this. Rest assured that as I write this, I am full of joy beyond all expression. The night I am writing these lines, I would not change places with anybody, with any man on the earth. I want you to know as well and be assured that my hopes were full and blooming with immortality, that heaven and love and Christ, which mean one and the same divine thing, fill my soul. Hope, the hope of the glory, fills my heart. To live is Christ, to die is gain. How do you explain that? How can one guy look at death and say, yeah, you know what? I can't trust God. And another guy who's facing his own death says, yeah, I can't understand all this, but it doesn't really matter. For me to live is Christ, to die is gain. What's the difference? The difference is faith. It's what they actually believe. Faith changes everything. So he's saying to us, brothers and sisters, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us run the race that he's chosen for us. In the weeks in front of us, I want to talk about that as it relates to us individually, but as a church, as a people that God has called to this place. What he's asking of us is to trust him, to believe him. Faith is not about conjuring up, it's simply trusting him. We're going to close this morning in a very appropriate way. We're going to share these moments around the table of the Lord. The point of this is to remember, so that one day when your child says to you, Dad, why do we do this? You can say to him, well, let me tell you the story. The reason that we do this is because a few thousand years ago on a hill near Jerusalem, the God of the universe sacrificed himself because he loved us. Remember. So we're going to close today and spend some time around the table remembering and strengthening our faith. I'm going to pray. As I do, I want to invite those who are going to help to come, and we will serve you and share together around the table of the Lord. Pray with me. Father, you are good. If we have any doubt, this table is a loud message that we have been loved by you. Make us people of faith. Make us people who, in spite of the things that want to scream another message, we believe who you are and what you said for the glory of Jesus. Amen.